Sometimes a single choice made in a moment of crisis can change everything. For Captain Riley Jameson, flying wasn't just a job. It was a calling, a way of life that had been pushed aside by new technology and changing priorities. In a world of stealth and speed, she was an anachronism, a pilot in a rugged A-10 Warthog, a relic of a bygone era. They called her Hawk because she didn't just fly, she hunted. But today, with a platoon of U.S. infantry pinned down, facing certain annihilation, the only thing that stood between them and the enemy was that single, determined pilot in her ugly, perfect machine. This is a story about the warrior who answered when no one else could, a story about a pilot and her beast, and a story about why some heroes don't need to be fast, as long as they're persistent. Colonel Jacobs leaned heavily over the operations table, his back hunched as though the weight of the entire battle pressed down on his spine. His eyes were locked on the glowing digital map before him. Little red flares blinked and shifted along the grid marked Echo 3. Each pulse was an enemy unit, moving fast, coordinated, and closing in like a tightening noose. Pinned down near a jagged ridge of rocks, a handful of U.S. infantrymen were barely holding on. They had no armor, no air support, and if the math was right, only minutes before they were overrun. Jacobs jabbed a finger at the screen, his voice low but sharp enough to slice through the tense room. We need close air support, right now. I don't care what jet. Any jet will do. The air inside the ops tent hummed with sudden urgency. Controllers scrambled in a flurry of clicks and papers, flipping through availability rosters. The updates came in rapid, grim succession. F-15s are too far out, sir. 20 minutes minimum. Raptors are grounded with maintenance faults. Finally, one controller hesitated, glancing toward the colonel. Sir, we've got one bird ready, fueled, armed, and on the runway. Jacob's eyes didn't leave the screen. Then launch it. The controller swallowed. It's an A-10, sir. Captain Riley Jameson. He didn't even look up. Send it. That was all Riley Hawk Jameson needed. By the time the order hit the comms, she was already halfway to the hangar. Her squadron called her Hawk for more than her flying. She hunted. Where others climbed, she dove. Where others hesitated, she fired. The A-10 community had been pushed into the shadows for years, overshadowed by stealth jets and speed demons. But in the right hands, the Warthog was a predator unlike any other. Strapping into the cockpit, Riley felt the harness bite into her shoulders, a familiar weight that grounded her. Her fingers danced through the mental checklist with the ease of 1,000 hours spent in combat airspace. The crew chief snapped a sharp thumbs up. The Warthog's twin engines roared awake, deep and guttural, a beast shaking off slumber. Riley eased it onto the runway, the tower giving a final green light. Seconds later, she was airborne, her jet thundering toward the fight. Back in the tent, Jacob sipped lukewarm coffee, never taking his eyes off the blue icons streaking across the map toward Echo 3. Only then did someone murmur behind him, almost hesitant, "Sir, did you really mean any jet?" Jacobs raised a brow. "Yeah, why?" "You just deployed an A-10, alone." For a moment, the colonel's face went still, the blood draining slightly from his cheeks. "God help her," he whispered. But Riley didn't need help. She needed targets. The valley opened beneath her, and her heart rate slowed the way it always did when battle came into focus. Below, chaos unfolded. Smoke plumes rose from burning brush. Tracer rounds arced like fiery threads into the sky, and a small cluster of U.S. soldiers hugged a rock outcrop, hemmed in by swarming enemy fighters. "Echo 3, this is Hawk," she called, her voice steady over the radio. "I've got visual on friendlies, and you've got company." Through the static, a strained voice answered, "Copy, Hawk. We're getting chewed up down here. Are you alone?" Riley leveled her wings, a small smile ghosting her lips. "You'll be fine." She flipped the armament master switch. Her HUD lit up with red diamonds. Targets. The Warthog dipped its nose. The A-10 screamed earthward like a diving banshee. Its GAU-8 Avenger cannon spun to life, the deep chattering thunder reverberating off canyon walls. Streams of 30mm rounds carved into enemy ranks, detonating trucks, shredding cover, and scattering fighters. Trees splintered. Smoke and disbelief filled the valley. Riley didn't climb. She swooped, banking low and viciously, her voice calm over comms. Target one down, looping for another pass. In the command center, the room went silent. The big screen displayed the drone feed, a single A-10 carving across the battlefield like a predator in open skies. Colonel Jacobs gripped the table, transfixed. On the ground, Private Carson, just 22, froze mid-shot as the Warthog roared overhead. That's a hog, he whispered. Staff Sergeant Villa, his squad leader, nodded with relief that bordered on awe. That ain't just a hog, kid, that's Hawk. They watched as Riley flew dangerously low, 30 feet above the dirt, performing maneuvers that defied the aircraft's bulk. She rolled hard over the ridge and let the cannon rip again. Enemy fighters scattered. Smoke rose in black pillars. Taking fire from the west ridge, the ground unit called. Copy, Riley replied. Mark your position. Orange smoke out. Through her scope, she spotted it, a puff of orange against the rock, in silhouettes with RPGs darting for cover. She lined up the shot. The cannon roared. The ridge disintegrated. One enemy flew back like a rag doll. The rest vanished. Threats suppressed, she reported, her voice steady as stone. Inside the tent, Jacobs muttered almost reverently, she's controlling the whole damn battlefield. Riley checked her fuel. Not great. Low altitude, full throttle, repeated gun runs. It was draining fast. But leaving wasn't an option yet. A technical truck crept toward the pinned soldiers, a Toyota pickup with a heavy gun mounted in the back. It was a killer waiting to shred survivors. Riley banked the A-10 hard, nearly sideways, and dove again. She got close enough to see the whites of the driver's eyes before she fired. The truck erupted into a fireball. Threat neutralized, she called. The ground unit's reply crackled through the radio. Hawk, you just saved our asses. Just another Tuesday, Riley said, though sweat beaded her brow. Finally, 2 F-15s roared into the airspace. Control, this is Talon flight. We're on station. Hawk to Talon, Riley replied. Welcome to the party. Scene's clear but still hot. Maintain altitude. I'm Winchester and running low on fuel. Copy that, Talon lead said. We'll babysit. You've done the heavy lifting. On her way back to base, Riley glanced down one last time. Soldiers jumped, waved rifles, and clapped as her battered Warthog passed overhead, an angel of metal and fire. 20 minutes later, she touched down. Ground crew swarmed the aircraft. Its nose was blackened with soot, one flap pitted with shrapnel, and the cannon's barrels still glowed faintly orange from the fury it had unleashed. Helmet under one arm, flight suit streaked with sweat and smoke. Riley walked straight to the ops tent. People parted for her in silence. Colonel Jacobs stood at the map table, arms folded, jaw tight. She stopped in front of him. You were first on scene, he said finally. Alone. Riley gave a small, tired half smile. That's usually how it works. He exhaled, shaking his head. I said any jet. I didn't expect you. She met his gaze, calm and unflinching. Then you shouldn't have said any jet. Echo 3 were gone. All of them. Colonel Jacobs looked up from his command table as she stopped 3 feet in front of him, boots dusty, flight suit streaked with smoke and oil. His voice was low, almost disbelieving. We lost 0, he said quietly. 0 casualties, not a single scratch on any of them. Captain Riley Jameson, call sign Hawk, just nodded once. Kong, they did their part. I did mine. Jacob studied her face. No gloating, no hint of pride. Only that calm, sharp precision of a professional who'd stared down chaos and bent it to her will. A faint smear of grime clung to her cheek, the kind that only came from low-flying support runs that hugged treetops and defied the manuals. You understand? He said after a pause, voice dropping lower. I was expecting raptors, maybe eagles. Riley met his gaze steadily. Sir, raptors don't loiter, F-15s don't turn inside a canyon, and they sure don't carry 1,100 rounds of God's judgment. Jacobs exhaled through his nose, long and slow. She was right. He'd known it before she'd even landed. Go debrief, he said finally, and hell of a job. She nodded once, turned on her heel, and walked out. 2 hours later, at a forward operating base tucked near the valley, the soldiers of Echo 3 stumbled out of the roaring Chinook. Their faces were streaked with dust, eyes wide, adrenaline still flooding their veins, hearts pounding, lungs raw. They had lived through something that should have ended in a massacre. Private Carson, barely 22 and still carrying the look of someone who couldn't quite believe he was alive, stepped off the ramp first. He immediately scanned the skies as if half expecting the enemy to still be up there. The sun was sliding toward the horizon, painting the world in bleeding orange and purple. "She really flew that thing alone?" he asked his squad leader. Staff Sergeant Villa, still catching his breath. Villa clapped him on the shoulder with a grin that was all relief and awe. "Not just flew it, man. She owned it. You ever hear an A-10 cannon up close?" Carson shook his head. "Feels like the earth ripping in half," Villa said, eyes bright now. "And she made it sing like an orchestra from hell." Back at the base, Riley walked into the debriefing room. Screens flickered with aerial feeds, helmet cams, drone footage, and mission overlays. Every gun run she'd flown was being dissected from half a dozen angles. Major Rhodes, the debrief officer, leaned back in his chair as she entered, still in her flight suit. He raised an eyebrow. 27 confirmed kills, 3 vehicle strikes, 0 friendly fire, and you nailed that anti-air with a single pass. "I missed the first burst," Riley said evenly. Rhodes blinked. "That was your miss?" "I was off by a meter," she said. "Corrected on the second burst." The room went quiet for a heartbeat. Then Rhodes leaned back and muttered, almost to himself, "You're ridiculous." The smallest smile tugged at her mouth. "You should see me on a bad day." Meanwhile, Colonel Jacobs sat alone in his office, reviewing the mission video. He paused the footage as Riley's Warthog dove straight at the RPG team, skimming treetops so low it made his own stomach tighten. He rewound it and watched again. Every maneuver precise, every strike efficient. He reached for an old binder, the one with mission doctrines about high-altitude superiority, stealth fighters, and rapid strike tactics. The kind of thinking that said the slow old A-10 was a relic. He stared at it, then slowly closed it. He picked up his radio. "Tell Air Ops to keep the A-10s fueled and ready. We're going to need more of that kind of flying." A pause crackled on the line. "Yes, even if they're slow, we're not fighting speed out here. We're fighting persistence." Night fell. Riley stood outside her hangar, watching stars appear between the faint scars of contrails. Around her, other jets were being prepped and polished until they gleamed. Her Warthog still wore the dirt and grime of battle like a badge of honor. She preferred it that way. A maintenance tech approached with a rag and a clipboard. "You want us to scrub her down?" Riley shook her head. "Leave it. Let her breathe." The tech hesitated, then grinned. "She deserves it." He walked away, leaving her alone with the beast. Across the base, soldiers gathered around a portable speaker outside the barracks. Someone played the helmet cam clip again. The moment Riley's A-10 screamed overhead, cannon roaring, a truck below erupting in fire. Right there," someone shouted as the explosion bloomed on the screen. "You see that pass? I felt the rounds before I even heard them." Wow, they cheered like fans watching a championship game on endless replay. But deep down, every single one of them knew this wasn't about glory or tech. They were watching survival. They were watching salvation. Later that night, Riley returned to her quarters. She sat on her bunk, unzipped her flight suit, and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a note someone had slipped into her locker. 4 words, written in thick black ink. "We owe you everything." She stared at it for a long moment, silent, then folded it carefully and tucked it between the pages of her flight log. With a soft click, she turned off the light. By morning, a new mission brief landed on Colonel Jacobs' desk. "Another unit surrounded, new terrain, unknown threats," the intel officer reported. Jacobs rubbed his eyes, sipped his black coffee, and didn't hesitate. "Send Hawk." The aide blinked. "Sir?" "You heard me. If she's got gas, send her." On the flight line, Riley already knew. She'd spent the night reviewing satellite images, memorizing ridge lines and escape paths, timing intervals down to the second. This wasn't luck. This was grind. Obsession. As the crew loaded ordnance under her wings, one mechanic asked, "Captain, Don't you ever get scared flying that low? Riley tightened her gloves. The day I stop being scared is the day I get sloppy. Helmet on, visor down, cockpit sealed. Engines roared, and another takeoff, another battlefield, another storm she would carry with her. And across the theater, the lesson was spreading. Don't underestimate the old bird. Don't question the quiet pilot. And never ever say any jet will do again. Because sometimes the jet you need is the one no one else believes in. And the pilot flying it? She believes in nothing but bringing her people home. The next mission came without fanfare. Dawn Mist still hugged the runway as Riley opened her locker to find a sealed envelope marked eyes only. Inside, a satellite photo, 3 radio transcripts, and a grainy infrared image of insurgents planting what looked like man pads, man-portable air defense systems, along a ridge that overlooked a key supply route. If they weren't dealt with, 2 convoys would be gone by nightfall. Margin for error, minutes. Riley didn't flinch. She geared up in silence, methodical as always, sidearms strapped, mission notes double-checked, half a bottle of warm electrolyte mix chugged. Then she walked toward her waiting Warthog. The old beast sat under the pale light like a loyal wolfhound, its metal skin still scarred from the last fight. Each dent and burn mark a story it refused to stop telling. Her crew chief fell into step beside her. You know there's a rumor going around? My mother, he said, wiping a hand on his coveralls. Oh yeah, so on about, she asked, not slowing. Command's thinking of naming a new tactical doctrine after you. They don't need a name, she said. They need pilots willing to commit. Still, he said, chuckling, it's not every day a Warthog makes the colonel question half the air wing doctrine. Riley paused at the ladder and finally looked at him. Doctrine doesn't mean a damn thing if it can't get boots home. Then she climbed up into the cockpit, ready to write the next page in the story no one would forget. Riley Jameson, call sign Hawk, slid into the cockpit with the ease of someone who belonged there. The metal seat was cold against her flight suit as her gloved hands moved through the startup sequence. Screens flickered to life, the HUD blooming green across the canopy, target coordinates locked in, guns armed. The A-10 rumbled awake like some old predator, restless and eager to hunt. Clouds drifted thin and scattered above the target zone. She rode a thermal current up to 10,000 feet before cutting the engines to a whisper. The sudden hush was sharp and absolute, broken only by the faint whine of wind over the fuselage. Gliding was dangerous. Without thrust, every turn was a gamble, but she knew the sound of engines gave enemies time to scatter. Silence, though, silence made people afraid. At 7,000 feet, her thermal scope picked up movement, small figures sprinting toward a vehicle with a launcher in tow. Got you. Her thumb hovered above the trigger. Steady, just one more second. Then she pressed. The GAU-8 didn't fire, it roared, a savage metallic thunder that ripped birds from nearby trees. Half the ridge erupted in rock and flame, the launcher gone in an instant. 2 silhouettes bolted from cover, scrambling downhill. Riley banked hard, circling them with lethal patience, a hawk with bloodied talons. On the ground, chaos bloomed. Insurgents scattered, radios crackled with panicked shouts about ghost fire from the skies. The last few survivors sprinted toward dark cave mouths carved into the hillside. Riley's eyes followed the thermal signatures vanish into the black. Caves, she muttered to herself. Smart move, not smart enough. She armed 2 thermobaric bunker busters, adjusted 6 degrees off-center to collapse the entrance without civilian risk, and dropped them in quick succession. The mountain responded with a deep, rolling groan as rock and dust belched outward. When the haze cleared, there was nothing. No heat signatures, no movement. Satisfied, she pulled away. At Forward Operating Base Ashburn, Colonel Jacobs stood over the live feed with 2 NATO observers. The room smelled of stale coffee and dust. Who's flying that run? One of the observers asked, his eyes narrowing at the clean precision of the strike. Jacobs didn't answer immediately. He simply gestured toward the collapsing cave on the screen. That cave system has been a weapons highway for 3 provinces. No one's touched it for 2 years. Satellites couldn't even find the entrances. The second officer frowned. Then how the hell did she? Jacob's lips curved into a rare, restrained smile. She heard it. Riley was 20 minutes into her flight home when a distress beacon flared on her secondary display. Wrong grid, 10 clicks northeast. Unknown air contact over a friendly recon patrol. Hostile UAV suspected. She glanced at her fuel. Enough for one more dance. "Control, this is Hawk," she called into the mic. "Diverting to investigate." "Copy, Hawk," came the crackling reply. "Friendly patrol lost visual. They are hiding in a dry gulch. Enemy drone overhead. Risk of recon capture." "Send me terrain." A topographic overlay flickered onto her hoodie. V-shaped depression, boulders stacked like old bones, and perfect for an ambush. She dropped altitude, easing the Warthog toward the canyon's lip. Suddenly, alarms screamed across her console. Missile lock. Someone on the ground had man pads, and they were already tracking her belly. "Too late," she hissed. Flares popped like fireworks as she slammed the throttle and dove into the canyon, wings clearing the rock walls by 10 feet. Branches scraped the A-10 as she dropped into the shadows, the engine screaming like a furious animal. Another lock tone. A second missile streaked skyward. Riley twisted the stick, rolled hard left, flares blossoming behind her like molten flowers. The missile missed by a breath. "Close one," she muttered, cold and steady. "My turn." She climbed just enough to see the gulch, then rolled inverted, diving upside down through the pass. Her crosshairs found a fighter shouldering a launcher. "Fire!" 5 rounds, that was all. The launcher shattered, the fighter vanished in smoke and rock. Riley righted the jet, scanning. Clear skies. Then a breathless voice broke through the emergency channel. "Whoever you are, thank you, Hawk." "Next time," she replied evenly. "Don't hide near cliffs." "Noted. You just saved our asses. Again." "Just covering the grid," she said, banking away toward base. When she finally landed, the call came instantly. Colonel Jacobs wanted her in the war room. Priority debrief. Riley smirked under her visor. Of course he did. Inside, Jacobs stood alone under the dim lights, hands clasped behind his back. "You saved 2 missions in 4 hours, he said, voice like gravel. "Spotted unmapped caves, dodged 2 shoulder-fired missiles, neutralized a drone. No support." "Lucky day," she said dryly. He studied her for a long moment. "You scare me, Jameson." She paused. "Good." He chuckled, low and humorless. "You know what scares me more?" "What?" "That we only have one of you." The next morning, the fob lay in an unusual stillness. No alarms, no sudden calls, no chaos. Just the hot desert air and the sound of nothing. Riley sat at the edge of the flight line, sipping black coffee from a dented metal mug. Her flight suit hung open at the collar, t-shirt darkened with sweat, fine desert dust clinging to everything. She didn't mind the quiet. She listened to it, knowing it never lasted long out here. Behind her, 2 junior pilots whispered near a hangar. "I swear she dreams in infrared," one muttered. "You don't fly like that without losing something," the other said. She ignored them. They were wrong. She hadn't lost anything. She gave pieces of herself away every time she dove alone into danger while others waited for clearance or cover. She didn't ask questions. She answered them with steel and thunder. Inside the war room, Jacobs was already studying fresh intel. Satellite shots showed insurgents moving again, this time along a different grid. Delta II, using civilian vehicles, slipping weapons along ancient caravan routes etched into crumbling cliffs. The terrain was worse than before. Deep ravines, hidden tunnels, cloud cover, killing the drones, no clean entry for infantry. No eyes in the sky, except one. Jacobs lifted the secure handset. "Send in Hawk." By the time Riley crossed the tarmac, her A-10 was refueled and waiting. Helmet tucked under one arm, boots scuffing dry gravel, she walked past silent mechanics who watched her like she was part machine, part myth, something that didn't quite belong to their world anymore. Her Warthog sat on the tarmac like a scarred predator, worn and rugged from too many sorties. The beast was fully armed, thermobaric bombs slung beneath the wings, GPS-guided ordnance strapped alongside, and a fresh belt of 30mm cannon shells curling into its belly. Her crew chief moved under the wing, performing the final checks. Same loadout as Echo 3, he said, brushing a hand along the tail. Fuel's at 95%. She nodded, her eyes scanning the horizon where the haze was thickening over Delta 2. Be careful, he warned. Weather's bad. No satellite coverage. You'll be flying blind for half the run. Riley tilted her head toward the growing smear of clouds in the east. Wouldn't be the first time, she said calmly. She climbed into the cockpit, strapped herself in, and flipped through the ritual of switches and levers. The twin engines rumbled to life with a metallic growl, hungry and alive again. 10 minutes later, she punched through the gray ceiling, swallowed by clouds that dimmed her world to a trembling HUD and streaks of wet steel. Visibility collapsed fast. Her display flickered, fighting to keep terrain readings steady as the low-level flight pushed the limits. She skimmed the canyons, low enough to avoid radar-guided missiles, high enough to skirt the unpredictable microbursts that tore along the cliffs. It was a deadly balancing act, and Riley played it like a veteran gambler. Then the clouds thinned for a heartbeat. In that brief gap, she saw what Intel had missed, a trail of camouflage pickups snaking through the canyons. Barely visible under tinning, their tires kicked up dust in measured intervals. Riley counted 6, then 8, armed, spaced apart, rehearsing movement. They're running drills, she muttered to herself, not hiding, training, testing escape routes. With no GPS signal, she switched to manual targeting. A small, sharp smile tugged at her lips. She liked manual. She dove fast, the first bomb streaking into the canyon floor. It hit dead center. Fire blossomed instantly, swallowing the first technical truck in a roar of black smoke. Chaos erupted. Gunfire sparked from the rocks. A lone RPG hissed past her left wing. No time for fear. She swung wide, looping back, and dropped a second bomb. The canyon wall itself seemed to explode, burying another vehicle under a cascade of stone. 2 down, 4 still moving, she reported over comms, voice steady. Nobody answered. She wasn't doing this for command. She was doing this to stop whatever those trucks were planning. On her third pass, something caught her eye. 2 enemy fighters knelt by a small rock-cut structure, struggling with a tarp over something large. They didn't run. They didn't even flinch when her Warthog roared overhead. They knelt. Bait, her threat system screamed. A red lock signal blinked. Source, inside the cliff. It wasn't a training route. It was a trap. She yanked the throttle, climbed hard, banked right, but too late. A missile streaked from the cave mouth, trailing white smoke. Riley rolled left, dumped flares, and screamed into the clouds. Come on, come on! The Warthog shuddered violently. The missile clipped her tail, not a direct hit, but enough to light her cockpit with warning indicators. She dropped low, leveling out. Controls sluggish, hydraulics wheezing, but the bird was still alive. She risked a glance back, left stabilizer damaged, but intact. Not dying today, she hissed through her teeth. Back at the forward base, the command tent erupted with alarms. Pilot Hawk reporting possible impact, someone called out. Still airborne. Colonel Jacobs froze mid-stride. He stared at the live telemetry feed. That familiar mix of awe and disbelief etched on his face. The same look he'd worn during Echo 3. She's still in the fight, he murmured. She's going back in, isn't she? No one answered. They didn't need to. Riley's hands made micro-adjustments, fighting the sluggish pitch. She knew the launcher hidden in the cave would be nearly impossible to hit from the air without precision guidance. She had one last option. The laser-guided bomb under her wing. Manual lock. No room for mistakes. She lined up the run, slow and steady, ignoring the rattling panel and the groaning frame of her aircraft. Her hands never shook. The canyon yawned beneath her. She released the bomb. It disappeared into the dark cave mouth. 1 heartbeat, 2. The mountain erupted. Fire and stone roared skyward. The launcher and anyone guarding it ceased to exist. She turned the Warthog toward home, limping through the haze, trailing smoke, but victorious. Colonel Jacobs was waiting on the tarmac when she landed. Her canopy hissed open. Riley climbed down, stiff-legged, her jet steaming behind her, left wing shredded to ribbons. You okay? Jacobs asked, hands on his hips. I will be, she said. That convoy was a decoy, he told her. They were testing our limits, seeing how far we'd chase. You broke the trap. Riley shrugged. Didn't like their hospitality. Jacob studied her face. We thought you might not come back. You were out of comms. She met his gaze without blinking. That's your mistake. Medics ran the post-mission gauntlet. Oxygen levels, reflexes, thermal scans, reaction tests. They searched for cracks, trauma, hesitation, regret, but found only fatigue and the quiet, coiled pressure she always carried, a dam behind her ribs that she refused to let break. That night, she sat outside her bunk, scrubbing her flight gloves with a toothbrush, a ritual to remove dust, blood, and weight. You didn't have to go back in. The voice was tentative. She looked up to see Lieutenant Grayson, barely out of flight school, holding a tray of mess hall food. He hovered awkwardly in the dim light. If I hadn't, she said simply, someone else would have died. He shifted his feet, hesitating. With that kind of damage, I've flown worse, she cut in. He swallowed, then asked the question he'd been afraid to. What does it feel like the moment you pull the trigger? Riley's gaze dropped to her gloves, still wet with soap. Final, she said softly. It feels final. In the command tent, Jacobs tapped the desk, eyes flicking over the newest intelligence reports. The pattern was undeniable now. Strategic feints, ambushes, disinformation. The enemy wasn't just attacking. They were baiting. Sir, a voice interrupted. Command wants a full situational update. They're asking for pilot reports. Jacobs raised a brow. They want her to brief? Yes, sir. Joint Command saw the drone footage. They said it's instructional. Jacobs smirked. Yeah, instructional, all right. He scribbled one word in the margin of his report. Hawk. Riley walked into the briefing room wearing her duty blues for the first time in months. The uniform felt wrong. Too clean, too crisp, stripped of dirt and gunpowder. No call sign on the chest, just polished brass and fabric that had never tasted the sky. She hated it, but she walked in anyway. The room was full of officers and analysts waiting. Advisors filled the room, some with hair the color of steel, others still young enough to be learning the art of shaving. She stood at the front of the briefing room, remote in hand, her posture sharp and unyielding. When she spoke, her voice was flat and precise, clipped with the efficiency of someone who had seen too much and learned to keep it locked behind a professional tone. This is your convoy decoy, she said, pressing the button to play the drone footage. On the screen, a line of vehicles moved like beads on a string. Spacing is textbook, perfectly by the manual, but watch this. She tapped the laser pointer against the projected image. Acceleration is off. Notice how they never pushed the lead truck forward. That's your first tell. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the projector. She clicked to the next slide. Here's the heat map, she continued. Low thermal signatures inside the canyon. That doesn't happen by accident. Active cooling systems, hidden launchers. Cave-based. They're not mobile, not retreating. They're waiting. She paused long enough for the weight of her words to settle. You might call that a weakness, she said, eyes scanning the room. I call it intent. Another click. A new slide appeared. A jagged topographical map overlaid with strike vectors. This was my strike pattern, she said, not optimal. The terrain denied any clean lock angles. So I baited the second launcher, flew inside their range ring, forced them to reveal their system. A captain interrupted, incredulous. You wanted them to fire on you? I needed to find the cave, she replied, without hesitation. They would never reveal it unless they believed I didn't see it. Another officer frowned, one eyebrow rising in skepticism. And what if they were right? She didn't flinch. She looked him straight in the eye, her voice calm and cold. Then I'd be dead. The room fell into a suffocating silence, heavy with the reality of her words. Finally, a voice from the back, Colonel Jacobs, broke it. And she's not, he said simply. When the briefing ended, the cluster of officers swarmed toward her, hungry for proximity to the legend they were all beginning to whisper about. One asked if she would train new pilots in advanced A-10 tactics. Another invited her to sit on the air-to-ground doctrine advisory panel. Riley only nodded politely. She had no plans to teach. She had only one plan: to fly. 2 days later, the storm came. Not the kind that weather reports warn about. Not artillery fire either. This storm was worse. A refugee convoy, 70 unarmed civilians, was ambushed near Grid Zulu 4. They were pinned between an improvised minefield and the jagged spine of a broken ridge. Mortar shells rained from a hidden hillside position. They had no escort, no armor, no satellite cover, and almost no time. The call from top command was brief and grim: immediate extraction or air support required. But the nearest assets were hours away, except for her. Riley suited up mid-conversation, boots pounding against the hangar floor. "They're trapped at the Valley Bend," a flight officer panted as he jogged beside her arm. "Mortar teams on the ridge, tripods, maybe drones. No confirmed air defenses, but no clean sight lines either." "Are they moving?" she asked, snapping her helmet into place. He shook his head. "No. Lead vehicle hit a mine. Casualties unknown. They're boxed in." She tightened the chin strap. "What's my window?" 14 minutes until they're overrun, he said, checking the glowing tablet in his hand. Riley glanced at her watch and swung into the cockpit. "Then I'm already late." This time she carried only what she needed: cluster munitions, high explosive rockets, and a full load of 30mm cannon rounds. Speed mattered more than payload. The Warthog thundered off the tarmac. Base control crackled in her ear. "Zulu 4 may have children. Confirmed family units. Watch your fire radius." "I'll be surgical," she replied. The land around Zulu 4 was merciless. Sharp ridges, steep gullies, and scattered trees that turned aerial recon into guesswork. But Riley had learned long ago that difficult was not the same as impossible. She dove low, engines screaming, scanning the hills. Then, there, the faint flicker of muzzle flashes behind camouflage netting. A mortar tube recoiled. She rolled left and loosed a pair of cluster bombs into the thicket. Direct hit. 4 more flashes erupted from the opposite ridge. She inverted the A-10, dove through the valley, and unleashed the GAU-8 cannon. Trees erupted in splinters. Dirt geysered into the air, and the mortars went silent. Below her, the convoy lurched forward again. Relief was short-lived. A sudden explosion tore through the 4th truck. An IED. Smoke coiled skyward. Screams carried even above the roar of her engines. From her altitude, Riley saw what the soldiers below could not. 10 enemy fighters spilling from the rocks, flanking the convoy. She didn't wait for permission. She dove, and the Warthog's roar became the sound of judgment. Fire fell from the ski, and in less than 2 minutes, the ambush had disintegrated. She flew so low that the soldiers later swore they could see her eyes behind the canopy glass. 6 passes, every round spent. And when she was finally dry, she climbed high, circling, watching, waiting, until the last civilian vehicle crawled over the ridge to safety. Only then did she turn back to base. Colonel Jacobs was there to meet her on the runway. "I need you to know," he said, voice tight. "If you hadn't launched when you did—" She nodded, bone-tired. 70 people, he continued, alive because you didn't wait for orders." Riley's gaze drifted to her Warthog, its nose paint scorched, gun barrel steaming, the words "Hawk's Wrath" barely visible under the soot. "I don't wait," she said quietly. "I act." 2 nights after the Zulu rescue, she sat alone in the darkened hangar, staring at the blackened barrel of the GAU-8. The weapon had been her voice, her shield, her answer to chaos. Over towns, through ravines, across kill zones, it had never failed her. Now it creaked and groaned like an old war dog that had given too much. She knew that sound. Her own bones made it. Sleep had become a stranger. When she closed her eyes, the same reel of images spun to life. Convoys burning, silhouettes dissolving into smoke, the shrill cries of children muffled by sandbags. She could remember every face, every sequence, with cruel precision. And yet, each time the call came, she suited up again. Because if not her, then who? In the officer's mess, the conversation shifted. At first, it was about her survival rate. Then, the unease crept in. "How long can one pilot keep this up?" someone muttered over mashed potatoes. "She's more machine than human now," another said quietly. Even Jacobs, listening from a corner table, couldn't dismiss the truth. Riley was flying almost double the operational tempo of any other pilot. She volunteered before missions were even posted. Half the time, she didn't wait for backup. Trusted, yes, but frighteningly alone. Then the alert came. That morning, a classified message appeared. Penumbra, eyes only. Jacobs opened the file and exhaled like he'd been punched. A name surfaced from the dark corners of his memory, one he hadn't heard in over a year. Argo, not insurgents, professionals, ex-military, ex-intelligence. Ghosts who sold their skills to regimes too cowardly to leave fingerprints. And now they'd been sighted near Sector Bravo 9, within striking distance of a humanitarian aid depot. They weren't just in the country, they were hunting. Jacobs found Riley at the firing range, casually dropping metal targets at distance with a sidearm like it was an extension of her hand. He didn't waste time. We've got a cell near Bravo 9. Not local fighters. Not amateurs. She holstered the pistol and turned toward him. How many? Unknown, he said. But intel says Argo, high probability. The name alone wiped away her fatigue like ice water to the veins. What's the target? An aid convoy, doctors, civilians, soft profile, high media impact if they hit it. When? He handed her the tablet. They're moving tonight. She didn't ask for backup. She didn't check the weather. Then I'll fly alone, she said. An hour later, she was in the cockpit, watching the crew finish loading the final armaments. This time, she was going hunting. Colonel Jacobs watched the hangar lights flicker against the metal walls, the night air sharp with the scent of jet fuel and hot steel. Out on the tarmac, Captain Riley Jameson, call sign Hawk, was preparing for a sortie that was as unforgiving as the weapon loadout she had chosen. Twin Maverick missiles hung under her A-10's wings, flechette pods glinting in the floodlights, and her GAU-8 cannon was loaded with armor-piercing rounds. No concessions, no second chances. She wasn't flying to negotiate, she was flying to stop them. A young tech approached with the final checklist, his hands trembling slightly as he tried to steady the clipboard. He hesitated before speaking, voice almost swallowed by the hum of the engines. Are you ever scared, ma'am? Riley paused, her hand resting on the cold fuselage. For a long moment, she just looked at him, seeing the reflection of his fear in her own memory. Finally, she nodded once. Every time, she said. Then she climbed into the cockpit, sealed herself into the armored cocoon, and took off into a fading dusk sky. The Bravo 9 sector spread out below her like a scarred battlefield from another world. Jagged dunes bled into the skeletons of dried riverbeds. Forests of abandoned concrete stood like broken teeth under a haze that blurred even the infrared. In the distance, the aid convoy crawled forward in tight formation, headlights off, metal glinting only when the moonlight caught an edge. They didn't know they were being hunted. Riley switched to thermal scan. The screen bloomed with 6 bright heat signatures on the ridge, perfectly spaced. Argo. They weren't firing yet. They were coordinating, waiting. She dropped altitude, letting the night swallow the scream of her engines. Her first strike wasn't meant to kill. It was a warning, a test of their nerves. The flechette pods spat a storm of metal that shredded through a line of trees, splinters flying in the dark, figures scattered like startled animals. Some ran for cover, others panicked, firing RPGs into the air, their missiles streaking upward with no hope of hitting her. She banked hard, feeling the G-forces squeeze her chest, and came around for the real run. 2 Mavericks locked on with a steady tone. Fox 2, she muttered, and pressed the trigger. Twin explosions lit up the ridge, turning fortified positions into burning rubble. Yet the thermal display showed no bodies. Her gut twisted. Something was wrong. The warning hit her headset a heartbeat too late. Lock-on detected. Missile inbound. Riley yanked the stick, flares shooting off in brilliant arcs. She rolled hard left, heart pounding. The missile still clipped her starboard fuselage, the impact jolting her teeth together. Smoke poured from the engine. She wasn't down, but she wasn't fast anymore either. She climbed, fighting for altitude. She needed to see. At 2,000 feet, the trap revealed itself. Argo wasn't targeting the convoy. The convoy was bait. They were hunting her. 6 new heat signatures appeared, well-camouflaged fighters with laser designators and man-portable missiles, tucked into the terrain like predators. They want the Warthog, she said aloud, her voice tight in the empty cockpit. If they shot her down over the convoy, it would look like friendly fire. A propaganda nightmare. This wasn't just tactics, it was personal. She checked her weapons. One Maverick left. No room for subtlety. Riley swung wide into the moonless sky, cut her engines, and let gravity take over, a maneuver most pilots wouldn't dare. A ghost dive. Silent until the last moment. Below, one of the Argo shooters lifted his head, scanning too late. Her GAU-8 cannon roared, a guttural sound that shook her bones. 30 rounds in under 2 seconds. The target disappeared in a storm of fire and dirt. She leveled out at treetop height, locked her last Maverick onto a pulsing signal from a command post and whispered, "Goodbye." The missile streaked away, a flash in the night, direct hit. The ridge erupted, 5 targets down. The 6th had waited. She didn't see the missile. She didn't hear it. She only felt the violent sideways jerk as it slammed into her aircraft. Her HUD flickered, alarms howled, and for a moment she was flying blind. Still, she refused to let go. Back at base, comms lit up with static. "Hawk has gone dark," someone whispered. Colonel Jacobs stared at the empty radar screen. "She's alive," he said quietly. "How can you know?" "Because they haven't called in a kill." Minutes crawled. 10, 20, silence. Then, at 22:17 hours, a single line cut through the static like a lifeline. "This is Hawk, bird wounded, mission complete. En route." Jacobs closed his eyes and whispered, "Damn right you are." When Riley landed, the base fell silent, not in fear, but in reverence. Her Warthog limped down the runway, smoke trailing from one wing blackened with carbon. The front fuselage bore a hole the size of a dinner plate, yet she climbed out under her own power. Someone started to clap. She walked past them without a glance. "Get her rearmed," she said. "We're not done." By morning she was grounded, not for lack of trust, but because the jet could no longer fly. Both engine manifolds were punctured. Internal power routing was shot. Engineers said it was a miracle the A-10 had even made it home. One more hit, one more second in the air, and she would have been nothing but ash and aluminum in the desert. Riley didn't care. Jacobs found her in the maintenance bay at 0400 hours, hydraulic oil smeared across her uniform, a wrench clutched in her hand. She wasn't asking permission. She was fixing the bird herself. "They're sending a replacement airframe," Jacobs said. 72 hours. "I'm not waiting 72 hours, she shot back, prying open a melted panel. He sighed. "You're holding her together with elbow grease and rage." "That's more than most pilots start with," she muttered, never stopping her work. "You're exhausted, Riley. 2 months of red line missions without a break. I need you sharp, not stubborn." She froze for a moment, met his eyes, and said softly, "This isn't about being stubborn." "Then what is it?" "It's about finishing this." Intel confirmed her instincts. Argo's cell was prepping for their final strike. Their escape route was secured. A private aircraft set to depart a dirt strip near Sector Whiskey 2 in less than 48 hours. Their target? The last rural broadcast station still alive in the region. That station wasn't just signal, it was hope. It streamed footage of convoy rescues, humanitarian drops, even Riley's own Warthog carving through mortar teams. Locals had named her Shaheen, the Hawk. If Argo destroyed it, they wouldn't just cut a transmission. They'd silence a symbol. By noon, engineers had declared her Warthog structurally unsound for combat. By sunset, Riley had rewired the electrical flow by hand, rebuilt a wing actuator from salvaged parts, and burned her palms pulling a warped panel from the cooling system. By midnight, the engines roared to life in a startup test, the hangar shaking under the sound. She called Jacobs. "It's flying." He didn't argue. "When?" "Now." Sector Whiskey 2 was over 200 kilometers of barren cuts and dry craters. No support, no backup. Riley flew it alone. The twin Mavericks were armed and ready, a single JDM nestled under the fuselage, a custom heat seeker online, and her cannon fully loaded. Inside the cockpit, duct tape held panels together, wires hung like exposed veins, and the HUD flickered like a dying heartbeat. But it flew. And as long as it flew, Riley Jameson, call sign Hawk, would fly it. Beneath her, the land scrolled by like a faded photograph. Brown hills, dry gullies twisting like veins, and the husk of a once living city. Buildings stood hollow, a graveyard of memories. Ahead, the broadcast tower broke the horizon, steel stabbing upward, wrapped in sandbags, guarded by a few volunteers with rifles. No armor, no heavy guns, just hope. She keyed her comms. "Whiskey 2, this is Hawk. Any activity?" Static answered first, then a scratchy voice. "We spotted 3 armored pickups 2 hours ago. South Ridge. Haven't engaged." "Copy. Stay in cover. I'll sweep first." Riley banked right, her wings cutting low across the sun-baked landscape. South Ridge looked too calm. Desert stillness wasn't safety. It was the kind of quiet that made instincts scream. Her thermal scan showed nothing. No heat signatures, no infrared pings. She slowed, lowered her altitude, and let the sun cast her shadow behind. That was when she saw it. A flash of metal under a sand-colored net. One truck half buried, waiting. Then another and another. The vehicles formed a crescent, engines pointing away from the tower, not toward it. "They're not after the station," she muttered to herself. "They're waiting for evac." Her eyes scanned the desert until they found it. 6 kilometers east, a flat strip of gravel with fresh tire marks, fuel drums, and a temporary beacon blinking faintly. A landing site. A plane was coming. She dove lower to investigate, and that's when it happened. 2 heat seekers launched from the sand, one from the ridge, one from behind the station. Riley had one chance. She rolled hard, dropped flares, and snapped left. One missile swerved off into the sky, spiraling to nowhere. The other clipped her wing, tearing metal, shaking her entire frame. "You missed," she growled, steadying her Warthog. Her cannon roared, shredding the ridge where the first shot came from. Smoke swallowed the shooter. No time to linger. She locked her JDM onto the makeshift runway, their escape path, and watched her display glow green. Release. The bomb fell like a verdict from the clouds, and a column of fire erupted where the landing strip had been. Their way out was gone. The ground erupted with a movement. 6 hostiles, shoulder launchers, and heavy rifles in hand. Riley looped low, her cannon spitting fire. 5 went down immediately. The 6th managed to fire. The round cracked her canopy but missed flesh. She rolled, swung back, and finished it. Then, silence. The station crew emerged from their shelters, blinking at the sky like they'd seen a god descend in iron and flame. Someone lifted a hand-crank camera. Riley didn't pose. She hovered, then peeled away west, fuel warning already blinking. Back at base, she landed on fumes. Colonel Jacobs was waiting. This time, he said nothing. He just offered a hand. Riley ignored it, stood on her own, and for the first time in months, she smiled. An honest smile. That night, the footage spread like wildfire. The burning airstrip, the hawk-like dive of her A-10. Refugees huddled in tents and basements. Children mimicked the roar of her engines with their mouths. A mural bloomed in the center of a camp, her warthog arcing over a red sun. Locals offered her a medal. She refused. "I don't fly for ribbons," she said. "I fly to end things." But the next morning, she did something no one expected. She stepped into the training tent, faced 20 young pilots, some who hadn't even flown a combat sortie yet, and spoke. "You want to survive out there? Stop flying like this is a video game. Stop waiting for orders while people cheer. Jets don't win wars. People do. You do when you stop flying scared." She turned to leave, then added, "And if you ever need backup, you know where to find me." The morning of the final mission arrived gray and cold, a chill that settled into bones and memory alike. By first light, Riley was already on the tarmac, suited up, silent. Her A-10 waited like an old, scarred friend, ugly, stubborn, and ready. Colonel Jacobs met her at the edge of the flight line. "Today we finish this," he said. Riley's reply was simple. "Or we don't come back." The Argo cell's last stronghold hid in the mountains, a fortress buried in shadows, unreachable by drones, invisible to satellites. As Riley's Warthog climbed into the pale sky, the world felt razor-thin and cold. Radio chatter was minimal, only precise tactical updates. Then the canyons swallowed her signal, and the danger became real. Heat signatures flared on her HUD. Fighters with launchers, tripwires, anti-aircraft emplacements, they were ready. Riley moved like instinct. Countermeasures out. Cannon primed. She dove low, weaving through jagged rocks like smoke. Her GAU-8 barked thunder, tearing through the first cluster of hostiles. Rockets followed, slashing fiery trails into the compound. Enemy fighters scattered, firing blind into empty sky. A missile warning screamed. She flared, dove, spun. The Warthog shuddered violently, systems blaring, but she kept control. A second missile streaked in close. She banked hard, clearing a rock face by meters. Then a new threat appeared. A stealth drone hovering in silence. Laser dot painting her fuselage. She caught it on her HUD just in time. One Maverick away. Fire. The drone erupted in sparks and smoke, vanishing into the canyon floor. The battle blurred into precision and instinct. Riley was no longer just flying the Warthog. She was the Warthog. Minutes stretched into a lifetime. The compound finally burned, the enemy lines shattered. Target destroyed, returning to base, she radioed. Copy, Hawk, we're waiting, Jacobs replied. Back at base, her flight suit was blackened with soot and sweat. Mechanics, medics, and pilots gathered as she climbed down. Colonel Jacobs stepped forward. Jameson, you did what no one thought possible. She shook her head. It wasn't just me, it's every pilot who refused to quit. He smiled. We owe you more than medals. Weeks later, she stood in the Pentagon, receiving the Distinguished Flying Cross. When she spoke, her voice was steady but quiet. I fly because people need me to fly. I fight because people need me to fight. And I come home because I want to make sure someone else gets to do the same. The room fell silent. She finished, war isn't about jets or weapons. It's about people. Back home, Riley visited her old neighborhood school. Kids stared at her helmet and flight jacket like she was made of legend. Are you a superhero? One asked. She smiled. No, just someone who refused to stop. The colonel who once said any jet will do never forgot the day an A-10 arrived first. He went pale when he realized some legends are built not on speed or technology, but on iron will and one pilot who refuses to quit. Riley Jameson's story was never just about a plane. It was about resolve, courage, and the unshakable truth that no machine can replace the heart of a pilot who won't give up.